Hard Hat's all about showing up to play hard, doing what it takes to win.
If you want to cement legacy, win another.
He's your third center.
You don't want to pump him up too much, but it's hard not to.
This is maybe the most I've ever agreed with you.
Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Garden Report as we continue to break down that game one, the crazy one we watched yesterday at the Garden. Chris Herring's here from ESPN. He was in the building. He talked to the Knicks today. We were over at Celtics practice. So reaction continues. So a pretty stunning game, Chris. And maybe I should have given the Knicks more credit or I guess ability to compete in this series than I did. You know, I'm not a homer or anything here, but just looking at the regular season series, I looked at and was just like, man, how are they going to compete? It was overwhelming what the Celtics did offensively in those games. The last game was closer, so I read into that a little bit and said, all right, you know, with Mitchell Robinson back, there's more of an ability here for the Knicks to compete in this series. But what they did yesterday, I did not foresee. Overcoming a 20-point deficit, defending well, forcing the Celtics to seemingly settle a ton in this game and taking them completely out of their offense here. There was a lot of weird stuff that went on throughout the flow of this game that we can get into here. But, you know, a day later, what was your big takeaway from that?
I mean, I think it's a couple things. And first of all, I don't blame any Celtics fans, any Celtics analysts, reporters that are going to look at that game and be like, wow, I didn't give the Knicks enough credit. I mean, Knicks reporters, Knicks analysts, we all were kind of in the same boat.
Knicks fans.
Right. Like that. I think most of us have been of the opinion that if the Knicks can somehow get 2 games in this series, it's a massive accomplishment relative to what we all expected. So for them to win game 1, even in the way they did it, was a surprise. You just don't see that sort of outcome really ever. And looking back at the tape, I think there are times that you look up and you're like, okay, the Knicks did a lot of things well, aside from just sticking to it. But I think that the biggest takeaway that I have is the one that most of us have, is that you can't leave the Knicks in competitive games going into the fourth quarter. We obviously saw the Celtics-Knicks game, the fourth one in the regular season, be very close down the stretch. And the Celtics made massive plays, whether it was Tatum or Porzingis, you know, at the end of regulation or the end of overtime, making a big shot, a big play. But this is a little different where there's so much on the line. The Knicks are coming out of an extremely competitive first round series where they repeatedly had to win games in the last minute against a hard-nosed team. And obviously the Celtics dealt with that in Orlando to some extent too, but their series was never really at risk. The way the Knicks were very, very close to having to go to a game 7. I think that aspect of it makes it a little bit different, and that they're really going to have like a never say die attitude even when they're down 20. And so, not that I'm breaking any news here with this, but I just think the Celtics kind of tempted fate quite a bit by, I'm not sure if it was trying to land a knockout punch. I don't know if it's that, you know, that their comfort level is threes. I don't know if it's that they felt kind of like this repressed energy of not being able to take as many threes as they wanted from the last series.
It's a little bit of all of that. Yeah.
It was just odd to watch. It was odd to watch in real time. I've never seen anything like that third quarter where 20 shots are launched and 19 of them are threes, particularly when the Knicks are dealing still with foul trouble. And, you know, I asked the Knicks about that yesterday, and then they all kind of, you know, I think wisely said, you know, I don't even, it wasn't that we were surprised. It was just, you know, like these are the shots they like to take. But, I think you could play that game over 100 times and maybe once or twice you would get the outcome you did yesterday. It was just a weird game, but I feel like the Celtics really poured fertilizer on that result and that potential result by continuing to just bomb away when, you know, the easy answer, certainly in hindsight, but even at the time, I think, was to go to the basket to try to change things up a little bit just so that the Knicks couldn't continue to chip away. And this was something I even asked the Knicks about yesterday before the game of how do you compete with the math? And Jalen Brunson very wisely said, I don't think that that's really a question for us. I think that has to be more on our coaches in between quarters at halftime to kind of tell us if, hey, you guys need to be getting up more threes or you need to scale back. And, the Knicks were not the team that ultimately had that problem. It was obviously the Celtics, and it was something that maybe the players lose sight of how many threes they're jacking, but someone at some point has to step in And
I lost
you know,
track. I looked up in the third quarter there, I think, and saw 23 threes and 3 twos and was like, whoa, how did that happen? And it happened fast. The amount they put up there, 19 out of 20, I think, in the third with threes. And that stuff, I don't want to discount it because I think it is important. And there's a reason teams don't do that. Like, you want to have balance, you want to have some variety in your offense. And I think that was the bigger issue than the amount of threes they put up is just
sure.
single play with Tatum stepping around a screen and just pulling up, or just throwing one pass to his left or right and having another guy pull up late in the clock. They slowed down. I think there's some other weird stuff that happened throughout the flow of this game too that you have to take into account here. The foul trouble the Knicks were in does make it a little bit of a second guess that you wouldn't try to attack at the very least and put them in difficult positions. Like, that just be part of the calculus of the game at that point. But the Celtics also put themselves in a tough position. And, I didn't talk about it enough last night. I wish I asked about it today. But I do think one of the big second guesses in this game, and I liked it at the time, was how much they fouled Robinson. Because they didn't do it
Yes.
with a bench guy who wasn't playing. They did it with Cornette. He ends up in foul trouble later. And then Porzingis is out of the game in the entire second half. So you don't have a rim threat center at that point. You just have Horford out there standing in the corner. So that blew up in their face in a big way. And I didn't think about Joe as the kind of coach that would do something like that, but I think he just saw Robinson missing free throws and was like, let's just keep doing this. And it did blow up in their face a little bit.
A little. I mean, I will say this. What I thought was interesting is that now for the second series in a row, Tom Thibodeau has blinked or at least flinched when JB Bickerstaff chose to foul Mitchell Robinson when he was playing really well against Detroit. And to a lot of our surprise, he took Mitch out. And the same thing happened in this game where I think Mitch was 2 for 8 from the line, was making an impact on the game. He was doing well. But I also think it was more that the Celtics were just bludgeoning the Knicks on the offensive glass. And because of that, it was like, well, if Cat is in foul trouble and we can force them to take Mitch out of the game, who else do they even have that can really compete? So at one point, what I thought they were doing was I think Precious Achua came in, and at one point I thought that Horford was out there and Cornette was at the scorer's table, and I thought that Joe was going to sub in Cornette to play alongside Al just to double up on. Precious Achua is like 6'9", which by you and I standards, that's a really tall human. By NBA standards, that's Jason Tatum is only a little shorter than that. So for a minute, I thought he was doing that, but then he came in for Horford, I'm pretty sure. But I was interested kind of that chess match. It was smart, but to your point, it also kind of puts a team closer to the bonus, which you prefer not to do, when you continue to foul repeatedly to get somebody like Mitch out of the game. But it was so interesting the way that the Celtics just had everything working in their favor. The lead, just the momentum of the game when they went up 20, the foul trouble, and then all of a sudden, the game just shifted, and it was a little bit of a slow burn, the way that you said, like you had to look up to recognize how many threes they were taking and the fact that the Knicks were starting to get some runouts. But all of a sudden you look up and it's like, wow, this is an 11-point game. This is an 8-point game. And, the Knicks, respect to them and credit to them for chipping away and realizing that there wasn't, a 15, a 20-point shot that you could get to get right back in the game. But the momentum shifted very clearly, and I just don't think the Celtics adjusted quickly enough.
Yeah, they squandered a lot of good stuff from that game. I felt like, they held Bridges out of the activity for a lot of the game. Horford held up so well. I look back at his defensive numbers from that one. I know he gave up the 2 overtime threes to Brunson, but he gave up something like 8 for 22 shooting in that game. Like, the Knicks just kept trying to attack him, and he held up so well. He played the last 10 minutes regulation after the Cornette foul trouble. So that's the kind of game you want to win when you get something like that from him. And then you just want to win a game 1 at home in general anyway, because now this series is in a position to go longer than you want, even if you're going to win it here. And, how does this change your thinking about the Knicks? I don't know how you felt about it going in necessarily, but I don't think, like we said, fans, analysts, writers, I think the ESPN count was 11-0 on Celtics
I was one of those 11
series.
Yeah.
What do you have?
I mean, I had the Celtics in 5. It was funny. I was talking
had
with
4.
a friend. Yeah,
I gave the Knicks no respect.
I don't think you were alone in that. I mean, I talked to people from my own spot. I talked to people at the game last night for other outlets. Um, we all kind of laughed because I think most people were kind of, they picked five, if they picked five in the series. And then the question was like, do you go out on a limb and pick them in four? Because on some level, it looks like that. Even the last game they played during the regular season, you could tell the Knicks really wanted that game. And to me, it kind of felt like the Celtics knew that. And they were like, no, we're not giving it to you.
Yeah.
Where they're hitting these ridiculous shots. And it was kind of like, it was a good opportunity to seemingly take a team's soul where they're really going for it. And you just kind of close the door on them as a way to say, and stay out sort of thing. So it was one of those things where I think a lot of people were like, okay, do you pick the Knicks for 2 games because you respect them in the way that they work and, Jalen Brunson and the respect you have for him? Do you give them 5 out of respect? Or do you just go off what you watched in the regular season and the fact that the Celtics are clearly the better team and clearly the deeper team? And so I think, I don't know that anybody on the national scale picked the Knicks, unfortunately. I don't think anybody at ESPN did, but I think a lot of us thought about it. I gave the Knicks a game. But I think to your question, let's see how game 2 looks. I could imagine that if only because of the browbeating that they probably took from Joe to some extent behind closed doors, just the challenge of having to watch that game back when you see all the missed opportunities and things left on the table, between the fact that Porzingis was not able to play beyond the second quarter, I would imagine that they'll come out more disciplined in game 2. And if that is the case, I really would love to have watched like an alternative version of that game, like alternate endings, because if you just change up the balance a little bit, I don't think the Knicks are winning that game, coming back to win that game. Maybe they do anyway. But I mean, for the Knicks to also outscore them from 3, despite how many more threes the Celtics took, is wild. And I mean, let's be honest, a lot of these threes were uncontested that they missed. So I'm not really sure what to attribute that to. I'm not going to call it luck, just because I think the Celtics also needed to be smart enough to stop taking them, or at least to have a better balance than they did. But the Knicks were fortunate and took advantage of the good fortune they had, given how badly they were just getting beat up on the offensive glass for so much of the game. The foul trouble they were in. They should take confidence from this, but even if they are more confident, the Celtics are still the superior team here. It doesn't change the way I feel about the series. I think game 2 could potentially really do that if the Knicks come through and either put up a really, really, really competitive game 2 or win game 2 somehow. Obviously, at that point, alarms are sounding, regardless of how you felt coming into the series.
Absolutely. And I'll be interested to see what the injury report's going to be here shortly for the Celtics. We got some updates on that front after they lost 2 players last night to an illness and an injury, respectively, there. Those could be big developments in the series if those go either way. I know Drew Holiday said after the game, too, and he was outstanding in that game. Another wasted performance in the loss there that would have been like a headline if you won that, was how good Drew was in that game. So we'll probably get it while we're on the air here, I'd imagine, based on usually the timing of it. But before we get into some of that stuff, I want to let the people know about Prize Picks, our sponsor here. It's a great time of year to go over to Prize Picks and see what all the stars in the league are going to be doing on any given night. Tatum's in the series. You got Brunson. How many points are they going to score? How many rebounds are they going to grab? Assists, all that. That's a big reason I love going over to Prize Picks, is just seeing what they think players are going to do on any given night. And for all of you who love to get involved in daily fantasy sports, they made it easy by just picking more or less on those player projections. So go over there right now with the playoffs moving along. All the stars are still in action here. Jokic, I don't think you can go wrong with picking on more on his stat projections right now. You have like 42 and 22 last night. Just ridiculous what he's doing right now. And they won game 1 as well in an upset there. Maybe we'll talk about that one at the end. But it's a great day to go over to Prize Picks with games going on every night to get up to 2,000 times your money by just picking more or less on a few player stats. You only need 2 players, more or less on a stat projection like points, rebounds, assists, and boom, you're going there. So join millions of users and sign up today over on Prize Picks. All kinds of great baseball action going on now as well. You can combine leagues. You can go for goals, points, or hits, anything over there. So go check it out. Cook up some hot takes with your friends and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Every Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts each player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. And this Flex Friday too. So you can opt in to your lineup builder and be eligible for the protected play. Choose squares from any game on the board. And if your lineup does not win, you get your net losses back in promo funds up to your promo limit as soon as the lineup settles. So check that out on Fridays. The Taco Tuesdays today, of course. And of course, get the $50 bonus when you play $5 over there with code CLNS. That's code CLNS for $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup over on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. So how concerned would you be, Chris, about the Porzingis stuff? And I don't know if you heard over at practice today, he basically has been fighting this thing that he was dealing with in March, around the March, like February in the March line. He missed 8 straight games. Doctors couldn't really figure out what it was exactly. Tried to come back for the Lakers game, couldn't, and had to miss 3 more games after that before he returned and looked good and finished the season strong. His first round was rough, but it didn't look like a fatigue thing. It was more the physicality the Magic played him with, him missing some shots he should have had over smaller defenders. There wasn't a minutes limit visible on him, although he had some foul trouble in a couple of those games. So this thing popped up out of nowhere here, and Joe got asked, did he know about it going in? He seemed to think it was something he found out more in-game. He got asked if this was the same illness as before. Said he didn't know, but he said later in the practice that Porzingis has been fighting through this thing and managing it since he returned from the original illness there in March. And he just couldn't continue, is what Joe said in this game here. He came out for halftime, looked like he was going to give it a go. Did some jogs up and down the court, got a few shots up, and then he was gone for the entire second half. He wasn't even on the bench out there. So this was a scary thing when it happened in March, and Porzingis was saying they were testing for more severe illnesses, and Trish trying to figure out what this was, and it was a really frustrating process. And none of us knew that continued beyond the point he returned here. So that was a big revelation today, and Joe called him day to day, said he felt a little better today than he did yesterday, but this is something now, along with his streaky play to begin this postseason, that's really looming over the Celtics here because they missed him when he went out.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't even play that well when he was there, but still, you would rather have him out there. I mean, I imagine having him out there at all is going to deter guys from wanting to go into the paint a certain way. He's just a presence. He's always been a presence dating back to when he played for the Knicks. So obviously you have to keep a close eye on that. I mean, you obviously hope you get him back. Maybe I was foolish enough during just the end of that Magic series to think that to some extent, whatever he was playing through or dealing with was fixed just because, the Celtics were smart enough to get him some easy looks and some dunks toward the end of that series, which then, the way that so many star players say, if you see one go down, it gets easier and the basket kind of opens up. He hit a couple threes at the end of that series. And so you kind of felt like he's back on track. And maybe that was too early of a proclamation, given, as you said, that he was dealing with something maybe more serious than what we were led to believe initially. So you never know with illnesses. I think it's actually harder to kind of gauge that than it is maybe an injury in particular. Yeah. But you certainly hope he can play. I think deep down, the Knicks, even if they win this series, they want to be able to do it, looking across the way and seeing everybody at full strength. Drew is back, and that's the way I'd like to think that most people feel about it. But he obviously makes a difference, if only because of the rotations that you throw out there. And how heavily do you have to lean on someone like Al Horford if Porzingis is not going to be there? How much can you do that at Al Horford's age? There's a difference with Porzingis out there versus having to lean on Cornette or Horford or what have you. So that potentially has a big role.
Yeah, so he leaves that game. They lost Sam Hauser in this one, too, to an ankle injury that didn't look great. He was not wearing a shoe. He was in like a flip-flop in the hallway there, and Joe called him day-to-day as well. So that wasn't ideal. He's another guy who struggled in that first round. Didn't play in the first half. Another curious decision in this one. Joe said it was matchups today. I don't know. Like, if you're going to shoot 63s in a game, you probably want a guy like Hauser out there taking some of them. So I think there's a lot more second guessing, of Joe after this game than I felt initially. That was pretty fair to me. In turn, I thought Tibbs coached a good game, and he rolled out some stuff for this matchup here that we didn't see during the regular season. And it's pretty crazy. I know some of the, writers on the New York side were writing about this. This is what you imagine the Knicks were going to look like going up against the Celtics this year, using the wing length, hedging a little bit on some drives, really making Tatum and Brown uncomfortable. I thought the game plan was fantastic, slowing those guys. And when you look back at the film, Bridges and OG are in the gaps every single time on those guys. And that's why the Celtics had to settle for so many threes here, is they just couldn't get to the paint. I thought there were some good zone looks in this game Tibbs threw out there with guys lined up on the back side against the basket. And for all the people saying, drive to the rim, every time the Celtics did it, they were turning the ball over or running into a brick wall or just, playing out of control. So there weren't good 2-point looks there to be had other than pulling up from the mid-range over that wall. And this was just great stuff. This is like the Tibbs I imagine, in the past. He's just able to really scheme it up, really get into his defensive bag and make things tough for the other team. And that's not who these Knicks were for a lot of this year. They obviously had a very disappointing defensive season. When I look back at the film of these regular season games between these two, I thought he was just throwing out some like easy double teams that the Celtics could pass right out of. And, they were just an easy team to score on in that regular season series, the way they used Towns, all this stuff. But in this game, it was a whole different dynamic. And I don't know if they were like saving stuff for a playoff series or came up with some new stuff here for this one after what failed during the regular season. But this is not the Knicks defense we watched against the Celtics during the year.
Yeah, I think there's two things that come to mind for this. One is that Towns had the foul trouble so early that it kind of forced them into some different stuff. I think Towns has been a relatively easy mark for a lot of teams. I know through a good chunk of that first round.
He was early in this game too, I'd say.
Yeah, he was letting up, I think, the highest field goal percentage in the league among postseason centers for a lot of the first round. I don't know if he finished that way. And that was equivalent to something that we saw for a lot of the regular season too, that he really likes to play drop. You obviously can't do that against the Celtics. And then the Knicks tried that more than anybody else during the season against the Celtics. And, the result was just this bombs away
50,
offense.
43, 80. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a really high number. I think 21 threes per game on average against the Knicks over those 4 games. And you can't beat the Celtics that way. If the Celtics make 6, 7, 8 more threes than they did yesterday, then the game is over. It's not close, and we're not having any of these conversations. So that is a big difference. I think the other easy dots to connect here are the fact that Mitchell Robinson only played in that 4th game against the Celtics during the regular season. That one was close. And again, the Knicks seemed like they were kind of pulling out a lot more stops in that game. If I remember correctly, they moved OG onto Tatum in that game, whereas before they had basically used kind of the same defense that they used for a lot of the regular season, which was Mikal Bridges was going to guard whoever had the ball, which is not a terrible matchup, but not one that I think really bothers the crap out of Tatum to have Bridges on him.
No, he's not as physical as OG.
Sure. And so from that standpoint, you saw a different look in that game, probably one that you would want to kind of use more in a playoff setting. But I feel like the Knicks really wanted to get that 4th game, if only to get the monkey off their back of they can't beat an elite team. Obviously, they were 0-8 against the Celtics and the Cavs during the regular season. Mitchell Robinson was back. So there were different elements there, and they held that game a lot closer. They didn't win it, but this is a game where all of a sudden you're watching Mitchell Robinson in better shape than he was during that first meeting, but also having to play longer minutes because of the Towns foul trouble. And again, the idea of the Celtics trying to play him off the court for one reason or another, because he can make an impact. He can kind of slow down the offensive rebounds and stuff like that the Celtics are getting. And all of a sudden, if you have to roll out Precious Achiuwa as opposed to Towns or Robinson, you would love to do that, and especially in a playoff setting. So I think that those are differences, but really just the idea of the wings. I mean, even my editor messaged me a little bit ago just to talk about like that was a hell of a performance from them, right? And we've seen a little bit more of it during the playoffs. There was one sequence in particular against the Pistons where OG flies out of nowhere to make this block, which starts the Knicks in transition. Bridges recovers the ball and throws down just this thunderous dunk with his left hand, the likes of which we haven't seen all year. And I think when they traded for Bridges, I think a lot of people had the questions about the 5 picks right off the bat of, wow, that seems like a really heavy price to pay for a good player, but maybe not, certainly not your best player, even your second best player. A really heavy price to pay. And it felt like something where they were trying to replicate to some extent what the Celtics had done by getting Derek White. And obviously getting Towns is kind of replicating the Porzingis acquisition. The difference was the Celtics paid a smarter price for those two. And it's something that was a more value price for those two than the Knicks did. They seemed to pay certainly a premium with Bridges, but probably with Towns too, considering that Randall, first of all, has had a really nice postseason so far. But secondly, Dante DiVincenzo was second in the league and third in the league in 3-pointers last year. So they gave up a lot of their identity and their toughness and their 3-point shooting and stuff like that. I say all of that to say this. The sort of performance that you saw last night from Mikal, even with him not shooting well, and certainly the performance you saw with OG, this is what you traded for. This is what you hoped for them to be a really good defensive wing presence, specifically to be able to guard the Celtics' best 2 players. And, there were still moments there where it looked like Tatum was cooking, certainly early on. And certainly Brown had moments that were really nice as well, not with his jump shot for the most part. Yeah, but just generally speaking, you need 2 really stellar wing defenders and really more than that from a team concept to keep this team somewhat in check. But if you can play a competitive series against this team, you're going to have to be able to stop those guys. We saw that with Orlando. We saw that, yesterday. But if they can string together a couple more performances like that, it gives the Knicks a chance. And I think really that's all you can ask for, given what you saw in the regular season. That did not feel like an anomaly during the regular season. They were just a better team because they were better at those positions. But maybe the Knicks now have the requisite experience playing together and having Mitchell Robinson out there with them as well to really fortify the defense. But that was a different level that we saw yesterday. Certainly in the second half, it was not just, they're missing shots. I think, they can also entice you to want to take those shots given what you're seeing in the lane and maybe the lack of space there. So I think you're right to point that out.
Yeah, and it stood out to me, Towns, Hart, especially after the game, being like, we didn't want to give up 63s. Like,
right.
if I heard them say after the game, oh, that was the game plan and we did it to a T and they fell into our trap, that would make me feel a little better about them. Plus, I think the Celtics, with their full complement of players, if they're able to get that back without foul trouble and all that, have different answers to, you mentioned some of the double big looks they go to and Porzingis' impact and all that. And we'll see how impactful he can be if he gets back. But I think it just ends up being a whole different approach with those guys intact there. Like they were in their 5-out lineup for a lot of this game and just ended up shooting a lot of threes because of it. They didn't really have the opportunities to get in the paint touches. And the Knicks prevented that with their defense. And I thought the game plan was fantastic here. I'll say this too. Stylistically, the Knicks, and this wasn't their best offensive night, but they did catch the Celtics off guard in the fourth quarter and then especially in overtime. There is a playoff level freeness to their offense. Like they're coming around handoffs, they're kind of just making reads. Guys are cutting. That Hart pass to OG for the and one in overtime was a brilliant play. And Brunson's just in full control right now. And he started this game slow. I want to paint the picture for people a little bit too, because like I mentioned, there was not a lot of confidence from Knicks fans going into the series that I heard. I was outside the arena interviewing some fans. Knicks fans didn't really want to talk too much. The one I talked to was like, maybe we'll get a game. And that's not Knicks fans, right? Like these guys are going to, talk themselves into winning this series. They're going to hype themselves up. But as this game went on and as Brunson started to hit some shots in that second half, there were a lot of pockets of Knicks fans in the building, and they really started to break through. And then by the end of the game, they win, and there's a whole section of them going crazy in there. And so, there was just this building belief on that side, on that team, but also in the crowd for this group here that was like, wow, this is what it was supposed to look like here. And so I'm not going to sit here and say that like this is the start of them building up an upset here, but I can at least see it now. Like there was a team on paper here at the beginning of the year that everyone said, this is the kind of roster you need to match up with Boston here. And this is what we expected it to look like here. And what I want to ask you is the Brunson piece, because he came out of that first round series on such a tear, the game-winning shot in game 6. It didn't carry over the first half of this game, but then he started getting into that bag of tricks that he was pulling out in that series into the second half and the clutch plays. And he should have had that bank shot at the end of regulation, sneaking by Drew Holiday there. So I do wonder, is he on the kind of run right now that could actually change the dynamic of this series? Like, is he going to play that much better than Tatum? Is he going to be able to get that many key shots off when they're down 20 in a game or in a close game late to be able to swing a couple games? Because I used to have this, I don't know how much it's true anymore, but the best player in a series is often going to have the edge in a series. And he at least has the capability to be the best player in this series.
Sure. I will say this. I want to lay out two things. One, I think it's possible. I mean, I think last night showed why it's possible. You and I and everybody in the building, frankly, we're watching Tatum make, even if you want to give the Knicks full credit for what they were doing defensively, the looks there, sometimes in football, you can disguise your look to make it look as if, you're open. You've got space to make this throw. And then it changes really quickly, like post snap. Even if the Knicks were doing that defensively to Tatum, the level of decision making was not ideal from him. You need him to kind of think a little bit more, whether it is to move the ball, whether it is to try to drive and kick or whatever it is, it can't be to settle as much as he did or to step back as much as he did. And because of that, if he's going to do that more this series, which I would imagine game 2 looks much different from him because of the way game 1 ended. But if he is going to make decisions like that, absolutely, Brunson can be the best player in this series. Jaylen Brown, obviously, a finals MVP. He can perform better, and I imagine that he will as well. But Brunson is capable of taking that mantle if these two guys don't do it. There's no question in my mind, late game performances, you generally don't have to wonder what you're going to get from him. And sometimes there have been times, obviously, where Tatum can really struggle for a good chunk of a series or even at the end of games. He also can do the exact opposite of that. We've seen that from him too. But the other thing that I want to mention that I think is really important, you obviously touched on it, but we haven't really capitalized it. One of the reasons that I felt so confident in the Celtics in the series was depth. And if Joe Mazzulla is not going to play Sam Hauser, and now Sam Hauser is hurt, if Porzingis is now dealing further with this mystery illness, all of a sudden the depth question is kind of taken out of the mix from what it was before. If the depth is more even and Brunson is kind of willing to say, like, I'm going to be the best player in the series and I'm going to put my stamp on it, all bets are off at a certain point. I would still I would need to see at some point that the Celtics are willing to punch back from that standpoint, but it's not. I mean, the Knicks had a little bit of upside here. I think the lack of Mitchell Robinson's availability during most of the season, the two big looks that they now can throw out there to kind of guard and cover for Towns. And I think, frankly, the idea that Bridges has looked like a better player in the postseason, whether he's making shots or not, he's been on the defensive end making big plays. We saw the game, the play to end the last game.
That moment at the end might vault him into more productivity because it was just such a great play for him.
Yeah, and he's had a few. I mean, it was. I appreciate that Josh Hart mentioned it because I know I've been critical of Bridges. I remember asking him on media day to start the season, are you cognizant, like, do you think at all about what all was invested to get you? Because it's not your problem, right? But I know that if and when things go wrong in any organization, certainly in a big market like New York, fans seize on that. And it's not his fault that the Knicks found him worthy of 5 picks, but it's just going to be a thing, particularly when Karl Towns will always be able to produce more statistically than Bridges. So even if he's not good defensively, the blame will not be assigned to him the way that it will be for someone like Bridges. And I think I knew that. And so this season was rough for him a lot of the time. But he did have several games where even if he's not scoring 30, he's coming up with the ball. He had 2 games in a week-long span where I think he had game-winning blocks after Brunson had hit essentially like a go-ahead shot. So Brunson gets the credit for the shot that won the game, but Bridges made the stop that closed it. And yesterday was more of the same. Between him and the way that OG has been playing for a good chunk of the playoffs, basically when the Knicks decide to keep feeding him the ball, there was upside here. And do I feel like it's enough to knock the Celtics out? No, it was one game. The Celtics shot themselves in the foot plenty in this game, and they're also back for game 2 at home. So if the Knicks somehow win game 2, again, the alarm bells are gonna sound. And I feel like at that point, you don't want to give more confidence to this Knicks team. I also think the other thing about the Knicks is that there were a lot of questions about whether they had enough physicality, whether last year's team was more physical. That was a matchup that I was interested in. I didn't think the Knicks would have won that either, but just the bruising nature of that Knicks team against the Celtics, could they kind of shake the Celtics, last year's Celtics, out of their comfort zone? And again, would I pick the Knicks? No, but could I have seen the Knicks getting 2 wins off of that Celtics team? I would have bet on that sooner, on a healthier version of that Knicks team against that Celtics team than the Knicks getting 2 off this Celtics team before yesterday, at least. So it is an interesting spot to be in now because all of a sudden the Knicks come off that Pistons series, a really hard fought series that, depending on how you look at it, on the one hand, wow, we really struggled to get past the Pistons. On the other, it's like we really had to fight and claw, and that reminds us of what we were last year. Granted, with different personnel, but like, this is who we are. And now we don't have to ask that question anymore. We're a team that's going to grind down in the last few minutes of the game. And then we have our captain take us home. If it reminded the Knicks of who they are and game 1 gives them confidence, and then they win game 2, it puts you in a scary place if you're the Celtics. So I expect for the Celtics to come out I was going to say firing. I guess they did that last game too. But I expect the Celtics to come out more
driving.
Focused. Right. I expect them to come out more focused. But I also think, Josh Hart,
I think it was a focus issue.
It just seemed like they weren't all the way there, because I don't think it's one thing for you and I to not notice how many shots they've taken of a certain type in the third quarter or the second half. But at some point, even with Joe, who has generally always been supportive of the shot selection and, hey, the math works better. Hey, we're capable. Hey, as long as we're moving the ball. But like, none of those things were really happening at a certain point. There was just enough stagnation where it just wasn't really the best look. And also, I think there were certain possessions where the Knicks were getting runouts because of it. And that alone should have been like, that's how they're chipping in.
It started to wear on the Celtics. And that's when you get into like the mentality of shooting that many shots and missing that many shots. And, Knicks are beating them back the other way. There were a couple plays in overtime again where Brown and Tatum were sleeping off ball and OG's catching a pass. And, they completely broke down on that Bridges 3. So it wore on them. And I think that's what you have to factor, beyond, are you open? Are you getting a good look? The misses piling up to how many you're stacking together, that many attempts. Like, there's just a lot of considerations here that had to go into account. And then you can get into some of the plays they ran in crunch time too. They weren't great. They're getting the, foul off like Towns did there. And I do think that was probably a shooting foul. But
did you think so?
I thought so. At least watching in real time.
Okay.
But you move too slow there. And I think, when I look at this right now, Knicks, if they have one strength in this series, it's the crunch time stuff. And when they got there, you knew they had enough reps in that first round and enough of a belief in Brunson to be able to get them through in those situations that they're in the better position if these games are tied or close late. And they went 4-2 through the first 6 games. 112 offensive rating, 96 defensive rating in the clutch, plus 15. Celtics with a couple rough offensive showings in that Orlando series, and then another one last night, 1-2 with an 88 offensive rating in crunch time. And I think their biggest flaw in those moments, and they were better last year on that championship run, they didn't play in many close games, but they're playing faster in those moments benefits them. And they slowed down last night. This pace was at a 91 in this game. Whether the Knicks wanted to or not, the fouling, I feel like, bogged this game down and helped them. It's what the Magic did to the Celtics in that first round. And I think you're at least putting a template out through 6 playoff games for the Celtics, who really haven't been themselves offensively for the entire postseason so far, of how to knock them off their game. And it is playing with a little more contact, maybe being willing to foul because you're going to get away with some, playing bigger, just a lot of different stuff you can point to that makes it more difficult for the Celtics to do what they want offensively. And, I don't know if the Knicks have the personnel or at least the ability to be able to play that out over 7 games and do it successfully to win a series. Maybe they do, because I don't want to underrate the impact of those 2 wings. And I almost feel like they lured the Celtics into hunting mismatches, just a lot of different stuff that slowed Boston down. And so I always think big picture here, because I think the Celtics are going to win this series. But does it make you more concerned? I mean, they might go against the Thunder down the line, who have the best defensive personnel in the league and certainly an ability to do some of the stuff at a higher level. Cleveland can get to a level defensively that I think can be worrisome at the very least, even though I like that matchup for Boston. To me, what we've watched so far against Orlando and New York for 1 game from Boston isn't about like, oh, they might lose to the Magic or, oh, they might lose to the Knicks. It's, is this offense versatile enough when defenses take some stuff away from them or make it tough or play physical? Can they get through that? Can they play through that? And you know what I'll add on that is these defenses have made it very Brown and Tatum centric. Like those guys just, really make them line up and beat us and make them take 15, 16 threes each and just don't let these other guys get involved. I think that stands out too from the way defenses have manipulated them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think Derek White is, when I think about the best things about this team, it's Derek White.
The Whites and Holidays and Porzingis. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, it taps into the best thing about that team relative to a team like the Knicks. The Knicks have been really top 7 centric all year, and if it weren't for the fact that Achua kind of was forced into the game because of the way the Knicks were rebounding and the foul issues and the hack of Robinson and whatever else, they would have been really short with their bench yesterday too. Deuce McBride actually played his best game
of the playoff
yesterday. Yep. We prior to the game shoot around yesterday, we were talking to Deuce kind of like, what's been wrong with you, more or less. Like he'd just been playing that poorly. And we're questioning, like, is it a confidence thing? Jalen Brunson, like, acknowledging that he's spoken to Deuce about the idea of, hey, keep your head up because we're going to need you. And he was great in last year's playoffs, just not playing well. But that's the sort of stuff that we don't worry or wonder about, like, what's Peyton Pritchard going to do when he gets out there? What's Derek White going to do when he gets the ball? What's Drew going to do, assuming he's healthy? And obviously, to your point, he looked the part yesterday. But I think that's maybe part of what it was, too, is that Tatum and Brown took so much of it upon themselves to kind of make plays, even when they were up considerably, where, generally speaking, when I've watched those sorts of games play out before, that's where kind of like the safety blanket of Derek White takes over of like, hey, I'm going to calm us down. And it never felt like that happened in spades enough to really
Pritchard
take control back of the game,
I think a big part of this team this year was Pritchard's ability to come in and take over for stretches and provide a different element, speed, dribbling ability, different stuff that maybe some of the starters don't provide in those spots. And I hate to always just throw it on the coach, but Joe took him out of that game into the 4th and overtime and didn't even give him the chance to do that. So I think there's a lot of second guessing on the coaching from this game for Boston's standpoint. Joe was pretty resilient today, I guess I'll say, in how he defended the threes.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right word is there. Yeah, but I get it because, like, there's a lot of stuff you can say about what the Celtics did here and the game plan and all that. And I do think the lowest hanging fruit is that they shot 63s. And to me, like, that's not what it was about. It was the way it affected them missing a lot of those. It was the way they created them. It was what they didn't do in other areas, like defensively, rebounding, all that sort of stuff. So, listen, I'll credit the Knicks all day long here. If this is going to be a 6-7 game series, it wouldn't stun me at this point. I'm still not going to pick it because I think my inclination is just to doubt some of their weaknesses, the Brunson defense, the Towns defense, stuff like that. Maybe I'm overrating that stuff, and maybe some of the more versatile parts of their roster are actually going to shine through here, and McBride's performance, like you talked about, and just Brunson's ability to live up to this moment. All that stuff I think you have to take into account here, along with the injuries and illness that popped up here on the Boston side. So I'm leaving anything open here to happening here. I know the chat's getting on me because they're like, Bob, you said sweep, and now you're saying it could be a series. I don't know what's going to happen here. That's all I'm admitting.
Hey,
I'm
man,
sure that's how you feel too.
No, I mean, I need to see it a second time before I believe
You
it. I'll
like the
put it that
Celtics
way.
still. You're really
Yeah, I
strong.
do, and
Yeah.
I mean, I think it spoke volumes to me. Not that it was disrespectful toward anyone. I think it was the right response. But when the Knicks won and really exhaled a little bit when they finally knocked out the Pistons, um, Jalen Brunson was asked directly about the challenge of this next series, and he said, "Look, I'm not trying to disrespect Detroit at all, but like that was a team that was relatively inexperienced. The Celtics are the Celtics. The Celtics have all the experience there is." And, he was asked specifically about Drew and about White. And it's like, these are some of the best defenders in the league. Everybody has length, everybody has skill, everybody can shoot. It tests you a different sort of way. And not that anyone will lose sight of this, the Celtics were up by 20 at a point where they easily could have gone on to win that game by 30. It should have probably ended the way the first three regular season games between these two teams ended. Like the Celtics were strategically kind of taking the Knicks pieces off the board to be able to mount the comeback that they did. Even Mitchell Robinson, like taking him off the floor. So again, just the range of outcomes. I wonder how many times out of 100 that happens, and it's not to discredit the Knicks. Because if it's 1 in 100 and that was the one time that it happens, okay. What we need to know is was it 1 out of 100? Was it actually 50 out of 100 times that happens? Because if it is, then the Celtics might be in real trouble. But if anything, what it should say to the Celtics is, okay, we're capable of going up by that much. We weren't even playing that great when that happened, by the way. They weren't dominating at that point. Like they weren't, they were having some threes go down, but their shooting percentage wasn't like through the roof at that point. They were getting a lot of their misses, was kind of how they did that, grabbing a lot of their misses and getting second chance points. But, I think it should sear into their head that we still can't rest once we do that. You have to keep your foot on the pedal. That necessitates better balance than what we had. And so I'm just curious how it will look as we look through it the next couple of games. I would imagine that, to your point, to the wording you used, the wording I used, they have much better focus going forward. I think I'm looking at this probability thing. I think they were up at 98% at one point. I don't know when it was 75-55 at one point, I think.
Yeah, I was curious that too. Would it peaked at 98.3 here at the 20-point game?
Unreal. So again, it's probably not one. I guess that means it's 2 in 100. That happens, but 1.7 out of 100.
Yeah.
But I imagine they have much better focus, and if they have that focus and the Knicks still take it to them, then that's where I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm wrong. And maybe I'm just leaning too heavily on the regular season or on the first series where the Knicks really had to battle a team that was certainly not as good as the Celtics, but I know for a fact, and they wouldn't own it. They're like, we already come in confident. We already say never die. But like, I just think that you don't want to give the Knicks too much steam here. You win 2 in Boston, and then you go back to New York for the next 2. Like, that's not a position any team wants to be in. I don't care if you're wearing the championship belt from last year.
Yeah, before you go here, I do want to get your thoughts around the league right now, what's going on, because beyond this series, if the Celtics do close it out, there's some good competition emerging. You have to consider the Pacers again as a threat, I think, considering what they put up against the Celtics last year in that East Finals. And it now looks like they have a huge opportunity against the Cavs with some injuries popping up and a 1-0 lead over Cleveland. Oklahoma City lost last night in pretty wild fashion. They were up 7 when I looked with 4 minutes left and lost. So I don't know what the hell happened there. And Denver, I think you have to start to take more seriously now. If like this is the Murray that's going to be there, and Jokic is still showing he's the best player in the league. So I'll consider them in that series, and maybe that alters the path here for the Celtics a little bit if Oklahoma City ends up losing in the second round again. Then you got that Minnesota Golden State thing going on, which is really fascinating series. So like when you're looking at the big picture here with the Celtics, like, is it still the Thunder? Is it still feel inevitable that's going to be Celtics Thunder at the end of this thing? Like a lot of us have felt this year. Are you starting to consider some other threats or teams here as this thing develops?
Well, I had the Thunder in 7 in that series. I mean, I do wonder, like everybody else, does the nature of that loss, losing that way on your home floor, on essentially a last second shot, when I think prior to that, the last lead that Denver had was in the first quarter, that that can do something to you mentally. I also wonder about Chet, like missing. If you saw the last moments of that game, he missed 2 free throws right before Gordon hit that three, and so psyche is important. I think you get a
And
chance
they had
now to
a
see
weird coaching thing too, fouling up there. It was pretty similar to the Celtics loss. It feels like the
a
way
little
they
bit,
squandered that game.
a little bit. So I never know that part until it plays out in terms of like how does that mentally impact a team that young, that is still trying to take really those final 2 steps. So I don't know, but I mean I had that one going 7 to begin with. I mean clearly Jokic was kind of interesting that like at the end of the game I only got to really catch the last quarter and a half because I was still at TD Garden at that point. But Jokic had 5 fouls, Hartenstein had 5 fouls, Chet had 5 fouls, and so it's like kind of very interesting. It tells you
What
about the level
happened
of
to the no
physicality.
fouls from the first round?
Right, right, right. Well, I asked that question right away when we were watching the game we were covering. It just a completely different feel and vibe
So
than
were
what you had the
we in
first round.
Orlando, yeah.
Yeah, so it's from that standpoint, that will be interesting to watch. But again, just the psyche of a young team losing a game like that at home. I don't care when you lose it, just that can really unravel a team, and you really have to badly reset when that happens. So I can still see it going either way. I still would imagine that Oklahoma City will bounce back. Obviously, they're going to need a really good effort in game 2. The one that I'm really interested in now is Cavs Pacers, because I think the Pacers were already better, I think, than they get credit for. They played a weird first round where Milwaukee was devastated emotionally after the Dame injury. Um, Playing against a superstar, but a guy that you could afford to let him get 35 and 15 every game, which is basically what Giannis averaged. But I think that also undersells the fact that the Pacers seem to be better than they were last year, which doesn't necessarily equate to, oh, they're going to make the conference finals again for sure. They have to beat Cleveland, but Cleveland now is not anywhere near full strength. They're hoping to get Darius Garland back tomorrow, but Mobley is questionable. And actually, I think Kenny Atkinson used the word doubtful for a couple of these guys. Also, DeAndre Hunter may be out. So all of a sudden, when we talk about the importance of Boston needing to get the next one, the importance of Oklahoma City needing to get the next one, Cleveland kind of seems the most at risk to me right now. Also, keep in mind, Donovan Mitchell played a very good game in game 1, and it still wasn't enough at home. The Pacers are much better on defense than they were last year. I'm sitting there watching Tyrese Halliburton fly around and make plays at the end of that game in game 1. So that could be a really big one to watch too, where, I can't even remember how many times in NBA history you've had 3 teams to win 60 games, but for all of them to lose their game 1 is just kind of bizarre. And I guess we'll see kind of how things track going forward from there. But it's an interesting playoffs. Like you can't accuse it of not being interesting so far. I'll say that.
Yeah, and it just through at least the start here, you knew it was going to be harder for the Celtics. But it's been so difficult so far that you almost start to think like they're not inevitable this time around. There are going to be
Yeah.
some really challenging series here, longer series. We'll see how long this next one goes, but you can see the East Finals finally going 6-7. You can see a 6-7 game finals this time around if they get there, and you have to get through it healthy, which where you're starting to see is a challenging thing for them in the
Mhm.
second round here. So they're seeing a team at full health in New York. I think that's different from what you saw with some of their opponents
Yeah.
last year as well. So it's just going to be harder this year, and that's how it goes. There hasn't been a repeat champion since what, 17, 18, the Warriors teams.
Yeah. 7 years.
So, Joe's talked a lot about that this year, and I think one of the things he pointed out is that none of those teams got out of the second round. I want to say, if you think
Oof.
back to it.
Is
So
that the truth? Wow. I knew the one statistic. I don't think I knew that part. Wow.
what do we think? So Warriors lost in the finals that next year, so that's the exception there.
Okay.
20, the Lakers ended up losing what, first or second round in that 2021 playoffs,
Yeah.
possibly against Denver. 21, the Bucks win, and they lost to Boston the next year in the second round.
Yeah.
22, the
Yeah.
Warriors ended up losing early after that. 23, the Nuggets win. They lose to Minnesota the next year in the second round. So a lot of those champions have
Sure.
lost
Yeah.
in the second round.
Wow. Yeah. And so many of them, as you're mentioning them off, not to nullify anything, but so many of them are health. I remember that Bucks run and the way it ended and Middleton's
No
health and
Middleton. Yeah.
but that and obviously the Warriors one where they lost Durant, they still made the finals, but then lost Durant during the finals for good. But that's part of it, right? And as we're sitting and talking about Porzingis and Hauser, like that is a massive part of it that it's hard to play longer minutes one year and then into the next year and even if it's luck, it's all of it. But I still think deep down the Celtics should have enough. Like to your point and your initial prediction, it's hard to have a team that you think realistically can sweep the series, just not win it when they're at home to start the series too. I think the Celtics will find a way in game two. And then it obviously gets interesting in a more hostile environment in New York. They're going to be really fired up. This is a matchup that Knicks fans expected last year. Knicks fans wanted last year just to see what would happen to kind of, I think they wanted to be able to test themselves and see what all Brunson could do on the biggest stage against the best team last year. And they weren't healthy enough to get there. So to your point, it is really interesting that the Knicks now have enough health to kind of play this out and to see what happens and to get their chance.
I'm stalling a little bit here. We still haven't gotten an injury report from the Celtics. I'll ask you one more question before we get out of here, because we chatted a little bit about when I was in New York last time. Your colleague Shams put out this, I don't know if it was a reporter, he said it on McAfee there, the breakup that's potentially coming for the Celtics this summer. And we've talked a lot about it. I think it's just a known thing that it's going to be challenging to keep these rosters together in the second apron era. Wick Grossbeck said he thinks no one's going to keep their roster, or no one's going to stay above the second apron line for more than a few years here. And the Celtics are about to head into their third year over that line next season. Mm-hmm. What do you sense is the likely summer situation for the Celtics team here? Sale's about to go through, according to one report this week. You got Porzingis heading into the last year of his deal. Drew's starting an extension. Tatum, Brown, White. Like, how do you look at the situation? Like, is this going to be one last run for this team, and then you start to break it up a little bit, just based off what you've seen from other teams around the league so far and how they've handled that second apron situation? What do you anticipate we're looking at this summer with Boston?
What's so interesting to me is somebody asked me this yesterday in the arena, and I don't know theoretically what makes it more or less likely. That I imagine winning, you would think that there'd be more of a clamoring for keeping everything together. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, you can't justify keeping a team together if you lose necessarily for what it will cost. But if you have to have that question about whether you keep the team together if you win, you also don't want to keep paying a lot if you where is that break even point of we can do this, but we still have enough to win the whole thing with? I mean, that's a question that only an owner of the team can answer. But
I think it's logical to say that, because if you win a championship, you're going to bring in more money. And then if you have the best chance of doing it again next year, you're setting yourself up to bring in more money at that point too. But it might also be a second apron thing. I've kind of understated that because I just don't think it's a big deal to lose your mid-level exception and not be able to sign buyout guys and stuff like that. But then when you start thinking about the draft stuff into the 2030s, you're like, all right, you have to at least consider that.
You have to. It's crazy because you said it yourself, but I kind of can't imagine it just because I can't imagine being that wealthy and having those level of problems of my profit shrinking from this to this with those sorts of astronomical numbers. Or even if it's not a profit, sure, you really want to make money on that, but if you don't, either way, I'm very curious to see what it looks like. I remember being fascinated by this for the first time, and this is what I said yesterday. If you remember the Hawks when they made that crazy run to the conference finals several years ago, and so many people were like, man, the Hawks are next in line and blah, 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 blah. And I remember saying immediately, the team is so young and they have so many good young players that there's egos involved with that. And I remember the owner of the team coming out then and saying, they're not all going to be back. And I was like, you guys haven't even exhaled since you made this run and you're already saying that. But
and Wick kind of alludes to that with the second apron comment he made.
Yeah, so I think it's coming, right? I mean, the fact that the Celtics went up for sale almost immediately after they won the title, that tells you a lot. And I would imagine that billionaires think alike. That similar to what I was saying a minute ago. I can't fathom that, but they probably can because they're in that. You don't invest in things to not make money. Like they're not playthings for the most part.
Especially
for
when
that
there's
level.
private equity involved.
Exactly. So from that standpoint, that day is coming. Who ends up on the trading block or whatever else? I'm not sure. Like I'm not Shams. I'm not well versed enough to know that stuff, and I don't pretend to be. But even more of a reason if you are the Celtics, if you are a fan of the Celtics, to really want to see them make this one count because they obviously have a team talented enough to do it, skilled enough to do it. It's the same personnel from a year ago. I think the other teams have gotten better, but I still think that there's enough of a gap there. And frankly, I mean, it's a little silly to say it this way, just in light of what happened last night at TD Garden, but watching the Cavs not only lose, but maybe look to be at most risk of losing their series of the 361 teams, that just has to give you more confidence of the idea of like, we just need to get this done. Certainly to come out of the East, and then even if we play against Oklahoma City, we've got more experience there. Like we just need to get this done and let whatever is going to happen after this happen. But we certainly need to take care of business this time around, certainly this round. And I would imagine through the East, there's a reason that they're favored despite not being the 1 seed. And it would be from their standpoint, from the fan standpoint in Boston, I imagine it would be a shame if they don't do that because they have more than enough to get it done.
Yeah, they've had that motivation this year, whether it's Tatum and what went on last year or just wanting to get back-to-back titles. Like they've been pretty intrinsically motivated this year. So that has been a concern, I don't think, even if it's not stemming from the ownership stuff. But you do hope they feel that this is an important run and that this isn't a promise to, be all present like next year. Like the fact that you can bring back 13 out of 15 guys from a title run is pretty crazy to think about, like they were able to this year. And that's just not going to happen this summer. There's going to be some changes somewhere on the roster. It feels inevitable at this point. That's what Shams was getting at there. We're not going to get an injury report, so we'll react to it, I guess, on Twitter or something when it happens.
Yeah,
that doesn't make me feel great that that's not popping right out here at 4 o'clock like it usually does. But we'll keep an eye on it. Porzingis day-to-day with the illness. Hauser day-to-day with the ankle injury. I'd have to imagine he's going to miss at least a game with that. It looked pretty bad.
He looked pretty rough coming up the court.
Yeah, so we'll have those updates when they come here. We talked about it over at practice today. You can go check out our practice update. We had a long discussion about Porzingis and where he's at in this postseason run. Thanks to Chris for hanging out for an hour with us. Always appreciate your time, man. Follow along his coverage over at ESPN. You can follow him over on Blue Sky as well at Herring_NBA. Chat with him over there and follow along for the Knicks side of things in this series because it's going to be a longer series than many of us expected and a more compelling series here than certainly I expected. I'm sorry, everybody, again, for jinxing it with the sweep prediction there. So I'll take the blame on that one. He's Chris Herring. I'm Bobby Manning. That's it for us here today. Check out Prize Picks. They help us cover this series, home and away throughout. Great sponsors like them. Use that code CLNS. Play $5, get $50 instantly over there. That's it. Celtics lost game 1. They're on to game 2 tomorrow. We'll have shoot-around coverage in the morning and coverage throughout the night. 7 o'clock start. Maybe there won't be 40 fouls that keep us there till midnight either, if we're in the game 2 here. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you then.
No one's sneaking a vegan brownie by me, I'll tell you that.
Okay, you know what, John? We're going to do it.
You have to feel that way too, Bobby.
I have to feel that way. Let's
Yeah.
slide Al over and make Luke your first center.
Bobby, we gave you Luke hour early. We're not going to end this on a damn conversation about Luke